You ever think about how much things have changed? Like how we used to get our news, back in the day, sitting down in front of the TV for the evening news.
Yeah, I can almost hear that old TV warming up, the static.
And that voice, right? The Walter Cronkite, maybe?
Uh,
That voice of authority coming into your living room?
Everyone trusted Cronkite.
Exactly. But just imagine it's 1960,
Yeah.
and you're not just hearing about the presidential candidates, you're seeing them.
Head to head.
Yeah, for the first time ever, right there on your probably pretty tiny black and white TV.
Can you imagine? I mean, that was revolutionary.
It was. And it totally changed how we elect our leaders. I mean, no one could have predicted how much power those images would have.
It's crazy to think how that one event, the first televised presidential debate, completely changed the course of American politics.
Right. Before that, it was all about radio addresses and newspaper articles.
Yeah, just words on a page, voices on the airwaves.
But suddenly, voters were right there, practically in the candidates' living rooms with them, seeing every gesture, every...
Indeed.
Exactly. Okay, so let's rewind the clock. It's September 26th, 1960.
Nixon versus Kennedy.
Richard Nixon, the vice president, a seasoned politician, up against the young, charismatic Senator John F. Kennedy.
Classic matchup.
And on paper, at least, it seemed like Nixon had the edge. But he was actually dealing with some serious challenges behind the scenes.
Oh, yeah. Wasn't he still recovering from that knee injury?
He was. And then on top of that, he got hit with a pretty nasty case of the flu.
Tried debating with a fever. I've heard that Nixon didn't wear makeup for the debate.
Really?
Yeah, he thought it might make him look weak. But he did use some kind of powder. I think it was called Lazy Shave.
Lazy shave.
Yeah, to cover up his 5 o'clock shadow. I guess it was a pretty common thing back then.
I've never heard of it.
Well, whatever it was, it didn't really work. I mean, not under those harsh studio lights.
And you got to remember, this was a time when, looking strong and masculine was a big part of being seen as a leader.
Absolutely. So you've got Nixon dealing with illness and all these anxieties about looking soft. And then you've got Kennedy, who seems to totally get what this new medium is all about.
Yeah, he seemed to understand the assignment.
Oh, yeah. Kennedy was tanned, well-rested, exuding confidence. His team had prepped him meticulously.
I read that they even created what they called a Nixopedia.
What's that?
It was like a whole file on Nixon's background, his policies, his weaknesses. They were ready for battle in this new TV kind of way.
They were playing the game.
Exactly. So when the camera started rolling, the contrast between the two was really stark.
Oh, I bet.
Kennedy, in his crisp, dark suit, just stood out. And then there's Nixon, pale, sweating. He practically faded into the background. Can you imagine watching this at home?
Wow.
People were blown away.
I can only imagine.
Yeah. Kennedy looked energetic, charismatic, and Nixon just looked tired and kind of sickly under the lights. Some people even said he looked, well, embalmed was one word that was used.
Yeah.
I know, right? So those visuals, those first impressions, definitely had a real impact. But what about the debate itself? Did the content of the debate matter as much as, how they looked?
It did. And this is where it gets really interesting. Nixon was known for being, well, kind of an attack dog when it came to debating. But he actually tried to tone that down for TV.
So he was trying to, manage his image?
Exactly. He wanted to appear more reasonable, especially on this new medium. But that strategy might have actually backfired.
You think?
He was so worried about not seeming tricky or aggressive that he ended up looking kind of weak and indecisive. And I think this really highlights something important about politics and image. It's not just about looking good. It's about projecting an image that people expect from a leader.
So you're saying that in 1960, maybe people were looking for someone who looked strong and decisive, especially with the Cold War and all that anxiety.
Yeah, exactly. It was a tense time. And Kennedy's youth and his confidence, it just resonated with people. Nixon, on the other hand, he kind of represented the anxieties of the past.
Interesting. So it really does seem like that one televised event really shifted the political landscape.
Absolutely.
Did the candidates themselves ever acknowledge that?
Well, after that first debate, Nixon definitely listened to his advisors. For the next debates, he made sure to rest up, he wore makeup, and he chose a dark suit.
Damage control.
Yeah. And he actually did much better in those later debates.
So he tried to course correct.
Yeah.
But do you think it was enough to really change people's minds?
Unfortunately for Nixon, I think the damage was already done. A lot of people had already formed their opinions based on that first impression, that first image they saw on TV.
It's like a first date gone wrong.
Yeah, sometimes you don't get a second chance to make a first impression. And in politics, especially in the age of television, That first impression can be really powerful.
That's for sure.
But it's important to remember that the 1960 election was super close. Kennedy won by just a tiny margin, so clearly there were other things going on besides just that debate.
Right, so it wasn't just about the debate, although it definitely added a whole new level of complexity. What were some of those other factors that played a role?
Well, Kennedy being Catholic was a big deal for some people.
I can imagine.
There were voters who were worried about him being loyal to the Pope, things like that. And even though Kennedy was charismatic, he didn't have as much experience as Nixon. So that was a big point of criticism. It really was a close election.
A real nail-biter.
It was. So you've got this mix of factors, and then you add in the televised debate. It just all came together in this perfect storm.
But even after that rough first debate, Nixon did eventually concede, right?
He did, though I don't think it was easy for him. I mean, that experience definitely left a mark. When he ran for president again, he refused to do any televised debates.
I don't blame him.
He even swore off television for a while.
Can you imagine?
But that first debate really did change American politics. It kicked off the era of televised debates. And from then on, candidates had to think about not just their policies, but also how they looked on screen.
Their persona.
Exactly. And that's a legacy that's still with us today.
It's amazing to think how one event, that first time politics entered the world of television, could have such a lasting impact. It makes you wonder, how much does image really matter in elections these days? Yeah, I mean, think about it. Back then, it was just this one grainy image of Nixon sweating under the lights that kind of captivated the nation.
And now we're bombarded with images of candidates 24/7.
Everywhere you look.
And they're not just random snapshots. These are carefully curated images.
Right.
Every photo op, every tweet, every little soundbite is crafted to project a certain image.
It's a whole different ballgame compared to those early days of television.
Oh.
Back then, things felt a little more, off the cuff.
More authentic, maybe?
Yeah, maybe.
Now it's all so polished. It makes you wonder how much of it is genuine.
And how much is just, spin.
Exactly. And that brings up a really important question. Are we putting too much emphasis on image?
Are we choosing style over substance?
That's something we all need to think about as voters.
So are you saying that image trumps everything else? That a candidate's policies or experience, it doesn't even matter as much as, like, their Instagram feed or something?
Well, I wouldn't go that far. I mean, obviously substance still matters a lot. Voters care about the issues, about policies, a candidate's track record.
Right.
But you can't deny that image plays a huge role in how we see things.
That's like we're judging a book by its cover.
Exactly. And that's why that 1960 debate is so important. It was a wake-up call. Appearances matter, probably more than we want to admit.
And politicians have definitely learned that lesson.
Oh, yeah, they've learned it well. Spending millions on media consultants and image coaches and all that.
Just to get that perfect photo op.
Right. But it's a lesson for us as voters, too. We need to be more aware of how these images can be used to manipulate us. We need to be savvy.
Critical thinkers.
Exactly.
So the next time we're watching a debate or scrolling through a candidate's Twitter feed, we need to really ask ourselves, are we seeing the whole picture?
Are we looking beyond the surface? Beyond that carefully constructed image?
Are we getting to the substance?
Because that's what really matters in the end. The policies, the ideas, that's what affects our lives. The image might grab our attention, but it's the content that actually makes a difference.
Well said. That first televised debate was a real turning point, not just for politics, but for our whole media landscape. It showed us the power of image, but it also highlighted how important it is to think critically in a world that's so focused on visuals.
And that's a lesson that's more relevant now than ever before. As technology keeps changing and the media landscape keeps evolving, it's only going to get more complicated.
So much to think about. It's kind of mind-blowing when you consider how this one event from way back in 1960 still has such a huge impact on us today.
It really does. And it just goes to show that history isn't just something that happened in the past. It shapes who we are right now.
It really makes you think, where do we go from here? If just one debate back in 1960 could change things so much, what about now? In this crazy world of instant information and social media.
That's the big question, isn't it? I mean, as technology changes and media evolves, it's a whole other level of complexity with this whole image versus substance thing.
Yeah, it's almost like politics is a reality TV show now.
Oh, totally.
The candidate with the catchiest sound bites and the best Instagram filter wins.
And social media just amplifies all of that, right? It's all about crafting that perfect image.
Filtering everything.
Exactly. Makes you wonder how much is real anymore.
Right. So how do we even navigate this?
Yeah.
As voters, I mean, how do we cut through all that noise and figure out what really matters?
It's tough.
Yeah.
But I think the first step is just being aware of it. Realizing that we're constantly being bombarded with all these images and messages that are designed to influence us.
And then what?
And then we have to be willing to look beyond that, question what we see, what we hear.
So it's like we need a whole new set of skills to, like, decode all of that.
Yeah, like media literacy skills or something, to be able to see through those carefully constructed images and see what's really there.
We can't just be passive anymore.
Nope. We got to be active.
Engage with it. Think critically.
Question everything.
Exactly. That's where the power lies. Not in the image itself, but in our ability to understand it.
That's a good point.
To see beyond the surface and to understand why that image is being presented to us in the first place.
So it's not about like rejecting the power of images altogether.
Right.
It's about being smarter than that, understanding how it works, and then using that knowledge to make better decisions.
Absolutely.
Image and substance, they're both important, but we have to find that balance.
We do.
And ultimately, it's up to each of us to decide what matters more.
Well said.
So, to all our listeners out there, next time you're watching a debate or scrolling through your feed, think about that 1960 debate.
Remember the lessons we talked about? Look beyond those perfectly polished images. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Dig a little deeper.
Because in a world where image is everything,
Being able to see beyond that,
that's more valuable than ever.
that's a great point to end on. And I think we've reached the bottom of this deep dive. We've explored the power of image, how the media has changed, and how important it is to be a critical thinker in this digital age.
It's been a fascinating journey.
It really has. I hope our listeners enjoyed it as much as we did.
And me too.
And if you did enjoy this deep dive into image and politics, don't forget to subscribe to the Deep Dive for more explorations of the past and present. And as always, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep diving deep.